What happens when you go to a higher frequency? Everything around you disappears more and more. So if everything's disappearing around you more and more, you have to identify what it is on its earth. You have to ground your settings of your earth, your spectrums, lines, and position, your lights, your metaphors, your communication setting, your rhythms, your correlation lines of panels, your interconnection systems, your interlinkings, your interfacing, your intertraction applications on levels of travel. So when you go higher, guys, you lose a lot more of the earth itself. You lose your identities of yourself. You're not in positions of yourself anymore. You don't identify what's going on with you anymore. That's okay. And that happens. It's just a total natural thing. It says, oh my gosh, I don't even know how to write my name. Or I don't understand the signatures. Or I forgot how to spell my name. Or I can't remember how to write my name. Or what dimension I'm in. Or where I am in this attractions. Because the thing is, you have to ground your highways at higher frequency now, because everything below is coming above. And that's the indication setting when it comes into the sun of yourselves. See, that's what we have to get in communications, all setting location into the mind, or more adaptation of space of time. Getting in that communication setting, that's why you have to really start codifying everything around you guys. This is the only way you're going to be able to balance everything in your location system off the travel. And the more you understand that, and the more you get in position on lines of balance, the more you understand how to use that in travel. Now that communicates to your system when you start to use all levels of the mind itself, which is its telepathy. But the process that is all through identifications. Understanding that lines out communication system is knowing how to use that through your formulas of equations. How to connect with yourself is understanding I'm going to higher frequencies. No, you're just identifying that you're already up in those frequencies. So the more you understand that, the more it correlates the system, and the more you let yourself go, the more you come into your empty mind of empty space. I'm giving you stuff that you guys already know, but you still don't identify that. You still need to have confirmation. You need to be confirmed. You be noted or verificated. Lines of verification to a system out through travel, not realizing that everything is done. So once you realize that, you're all formations of your system. And once you get in that position locations, you realize, wow, so I'm trying to flex up and down, but not realizing that I don't need to flex up and down. I just realized that I already know that I'm flexing up and down. Getting into that communication setting. This is what's happening along with ground centers of spectrum. The sun itself was on 12,000 line signals, right? Setting a square foot, set lines of all communicate setting and measure and scale, setting travels in point lines of graph. There's a reason why you guys are in a 7-day window, which is just 7 days a week. Okay, so you see it 7 days. Okay, the higher formation of the mind itself sees it as windows. 7 windows, 7 frames of windows, 7 tractions of windows, 7 correlations of communication lines of frames of windows. So it's all modified in line position location. So when you lose your identity, you find your identity in higher levels of space. What you guys get confused of is your flux capacitors, not sure how to go higher in set position. Triangulation system all through watts, directing signal location system all through a light bulb. Okay? All through its intelligence, all through grounds, insane lines of travel, happy face, insane position location to a system, off the calculations. So the calculation line is a direct line of link, how we process our communication setting when it comes to an acceleration system of time and measure. But the communication system, you guys have to get out of your days, months, and years more, because everything on the ground lines of setting and surface is going to higher lines of platforms of communication. Okay? Setting the spectrum of your Earth, circulation and rotation to its settings. So the process of the three-dimensional line, okay, that's what the sun's doing to your system. It's blinking screens, adaptation settings of travel. That's modifying the system locations of your platforms in position on 12 DNAs and travel communications. Setting lines of 1, 2, 3, 4. Setting lines of 5 set lines of communication setting to bypassing. Tethers lines of screens of panels, operation lines of sequence. Now the core center's lines of travel has a direct line link and location system all through track lines of pi. So the higher you go, the more you modify your system of space itself, right? Space itself is all levels of void. Okay? The volume, the operation, the intelligence of the direction, right? So you're consciously not understanding where you're going, but if you identify that you've already been there, it's a lot more balanced. See, it's like you get in a car and you're driving, okay, so you're driving in the car and setting attractions, right? But you forgot where to go. You don't know where you're going, right? So you've already been there. You've already been here, you've already been there, you've already been here in set position. So you know exactly where the car is going to be next, which is in chronological order through pi, right? Getting in that communication system is truly understand how to basically get out of the earth itself, okay? Get out of the earth, okay? But be in the center operation of you, right? So the lower divergent lines of intelligence is getting out of the three-dimensional line, right? The more we get up in line screen adaptation system. So that's what the sun's doing. It's changing the time measure, taking all communication setting coming out line screen adaptations and travel. So the position location is 12,000 line centers into 24,000 line signal into 48,000 line frames. Remember, this is dealing with the sun now. Into 72,000 line scales of computer framing into all else. The replica line commemorate centers lines of travel. Sets signals and line communication setting to 144 equals lines of 3 zeros in travel. 6 lines of high centers. 2 operates line sequence. 3 centers lines of communication system. Sets position of 4 lines of 7 over lines of 12 set lines of cycle generation screens. This is all calculated and modified all through communications and travels just through the sun itself. All right. Having communication with yourself, guys, is all lines of the mind 100% of the time. 100% of the time, right? 100% equals 0%. Okay? 0% equals 0%, right? It's all lines of position of pi, which you already done through equation. Pi is the set position location in your system, right? So you already done the zeros, you already done the ones, you already done the twos, the threes, you already done the 24 line signal. It's already done through your transmission system of your grounds and location system lines of travel. So your crop circles now are coming in declassification settings of setting, which is basically leaving the set travels, coming in higher lines of sequence in 12 into 24. And once it goes into 24, it goes into the next platform of communication. So we live on platforms, but no platforms at all, right? So the platform is the line of course centers when we come to all communication, how we see our galaxies, our universe, our set position location, our systems. So processing that is bringing you guys into your system is your AVR system, right? So the line communication setting, the Earth itself is leaving 3 dimension of everything into one body frame, into a paradigm. Setting travels in point lines of graph of 12 scales, set position of 24 clockings into 48 zero lines frames of 3 centers, 2 tractions, 1 division. Triangulation system, all through calculation setting. Okay, very complicated stuff, right? Formula thing of equations. So the more you go higher, the more you have to balance because you're going faster. And then you start to realize, wow, I'm starting to understand this, but I'm not understanding what's going on. So I'm losing tractions of the Earth, but I'm losing more balance of space now and 3 centers of travels and 4 communications. So I understand the communication setting location grid and line communication system all through settings. The process of communication lines and its parallels process communication setting to its portals that puts everything in the location system of balance and traction. Okay? Setting sequence lines of the Earth over line cross lines of screen adaptation. All right? So the more you get in higher line setting, the more you process your system to your 12 DNAs, which is your planet settings, your DNA tractions. Okay? It's not lines of diagnostics, location settings, directions, your networks of your awareness of what you're doing through the atmospheres. So everything I do, you have to codify. Because if you don't codify, the low spectrum of the light brings you down in tither of communication. And you don't want that in setting. You want to keep your platforms high, travel. Okay? So the more you go into higher lines of screen, the more you get out of low spectrum of light. It's all in lines of all communication setting, all through flux and travel, right? So you want to stay above the system and travel. Remember I say in that position you go 10,000 below deck? Well, now you can't go below 12, and then you can't go below 24, now you can't go below 48, now you can't go below 472 and 144. So that's where you got to stay because everything below, okay, is coming into its setting now. Through its all lines of its spectrum, its directions, sectors, vectors, and quads. So all the intelligence in that formation system is turning into its own CPU, which is everything, because we start to live in AVR, which we've always been in AVR. But the digital platforms of the 12 centers, the 24 clockings, the 48 frames, and 72 computer lines, puts all communication setting to its 140 grid in travel communications. All right? Sets travels in one grounds, 4 signals, and 4 center lines of course center location to its pyramid. Directing ground centers offline signals into low casing and direct signal lines of grounds and high set location system, all through travels and mechanism. The process line direct signals comes in structured design lines into interline communication and interfacing location to its system. Setting core centers in position of its yards. And yards, its meters, metrics, its scales in the communication system, all through tractions. Okay? Setting direct signals has a ground lines of surface and travel. Okay? Understand the modification grounds, high lines of signals, and high screen adaptations. All right? Coming into all communication setting, the process of communication system is keeping your high line screen adaptations of flux. So the more you generate the screen lines adaptation, all calculated and modified at the grounds, you get out of the grounds, you stay in modifications with the grounds, the powers of the grounds, the space of the grounds, in that communication lines to a magnetic highway force line communication system to its highway and traction. There's the highway. Okay, setting sequence lines a high position of 24 line scale. Don't go below that because you're now in a 12 line spectrum of low division locations of light and travel. So don't go below that setting, right? Sets position of 12 into 24, 48, and 72. 144 flux and screen adaptation of part acceleration system. Your torical fields changed, your correlation lines at high centers, your time capacitors, setting lines of position your floaters, 4 sequence lines of panels, and communication setting high lines of surface. Okay, process of communication inside traction. Okay, so it's about understanding what's going on with your system in higher screens. Higher flux, higher channels, high operation lines of your networks. Your connection system is all over the highway. Now let's get into the line screen adaptations, all set positions. This is a highway, all right, but it's not positioned 2 panels over 4-track communications, right? The highway cell has its own platform of communication. It has its own circulation of its own platform of communication, right? And then once you understand the platforms, comes in line signals and outline communication. Start with that setting, right? And then you come into this again, all right? In that position, it goes from this, but it gets more higher. The waves, the highways, you know, it's kind of like a slippery slope where the highways are going to higher lines electronic communication system, which is taken out of the holographic line and stream, right? From this to this, look at that. It's crazy how the highways change, right? So getting into the scales of line signals, process of the snowy graph interference, locking screen adaptation of centers, almost all screen location system, all few box frames, 45 lines of angles, 3 centers cross-line communications, directing 1 signal lines of grounds, high signal location across angles. Then we go from A-track, A-line position, A-line sequence, and set positions, right? So equals lines of north into position of question over mark, center calculation setting, and solar sail and travel. Okay, see the solar sail? All right. Setting course centers of thermometer, lines of communication to its compass. Directing course centers, lines of the sun. Now the sun is basically rotating and screen adaptation of the flux. And 3 angles of point lines of graph and set position. Okay, your sun is in traction to the setting all through operation. That's what your sun is doing right now. So your sun is just basically understanding what's going on through the modification grounds, how it comes in, it's more realized in the line communication setting to its pyro, that directs its location setting to its Kelvin. So we got 400,000 lines of Kelvin lines, setting sequence lines of 4 channels, operation lines in 1 sequence, 1 panel, 1 screen adaptations of flux over screen. Now the sun itself is creating its own holographic structure of its own Earth, that's creating its own modification system, that creates its own electrical line grid, electrical line panels, position lines of formats, setting travels in 4 settings, set lines of sequence, 2 panels operation, perimeters or line screen adaptations, and travel in that motivation system all through track communications. All right, it's amazing what your sun is doing by itself. How you guys are understanding the calculation system, the more you go higher, the more you come into the mind adaptation of volume. Volume, vast, velocity, equals lines of vacuum. All right, so set lines of volume, set position of velocity, vacuum position locations, V vector scores, course centers, lines of tractions, volume over C, volume over A, line conditions of volume over D, volume over C, V line screens into vector screen adaptations. Process indicates the system of travel, right? which is calculate and modify in travel communications. Okay? So that's calculation grounds, high lines, and sequence. So in that position location system, you have to truly understand how the highways change the modification lines of grounds from this to this, right? Teams coming into this and leaving this now and travel through its highway. Complicated because you're going to higher lines of frequency, so you're coming into position. Electrical bolt, a thunderbolt, is line signal in location system of travel. Okay? So you start with this, straight line, right? But it's an invisible line, right? Now you come into this level and set position. Okay? Your highways get a lot more complicated. They go in and out. They go dark, they go red. You know, when you understand the indication setting of the secure line defense line, the more power that you come in and track communication system is just reaching the networks into the pathological systems through the collagens that puts every location to your cerebral. Now, we already know what the cerebral is. The high conductor in line screen adaptation system that processes communication to its umbrella. Calculated and modified to the brainstem that correlates assess and location setting of the solar graph communication system all through travel. There you go. Boom. Now, we have to understand how this all works now because the position, location, and travel allocates time frames of location and system all through calculations. Formulate lines. Let's get into one QR code. Okay. You got a quadrant center, line direct signal, locations of question mark. Now, it's interesting when you come into question line of the screen, right? Which is the highest formation lines of quad. But position, location, system, you start with this lines. There's the question, right? But what if you do this and set position to its system, where it basically comes into the line and all communication to its system, all through tractions? See, we don't focus on this. We focus on that. And that's our problem, right? Now look at this. What is this coming into in traction? Right? What is it coming into in tractions, guys? Okay? What is it coming into in tractions? Yin and yang. Okay? See the surface? See the fish? See the 6? See the 9? All right? That's what it is. That's the question. The question is up, but it's surfacing down. There's 2 complacements in setting lines of travel. Pretty interesting to set location system off the calculation setting. But you can see the fish all through travel. Very powerful stat and set calculation screen the lines, adaptation of service, and travel communications. Yin and yang. How it comes in a rotation spin through a cycle. So the fish comes in a moderation system all through travel, and in 1 Fibonacci, 1 square root in square foot puts lines of 12 angles in travel communications. Oh yeah. So that's what you see through a question. You guys don't focus on that. You just focus on the question. The process of position location, how to see the question this way and how to see the question the other way. What surface is up and what surface is down. There's the yin and yang, there's the 6, there's the 9, there's the position of the balance of all communication system, all through center calculation lines of communications. All right? The center up centers circulates and rotates the system all through travel. Okay? Propeller lines and high signal location system all through calculation setting. Okay? Very powerful stuff. Right? So now you know what a question is from this level, and you turn it upside down to the other level. There's the 2 fishes of yin and yang. Didn't know that, did you? Know that now. So never question anything because it's not a question itself. It's a question of an answer that you already have the answer. Now, once you understand that, when you have a question this way, in that position locations, it's very powerful when you understand what this all means in set position. Because everything comes in balance of traction, okay? Through its communication system, all through travel, okay? The 6 and the 9, rotating in the same directions in quantum communication. You didn't know that, now you do. Now you know what a question is. It's a higher information system of all communication of formula through equation, right? Getting into that in lines of all communications, everything's been answered. Okay, and now you truly understand when you have a question this way and a question the other way, puts every location of balance that you already are identifications of. Okay, and it's much easier to understand that what that means in travel. So once you understand this, then you understand what you're doing. You know exactly how this all works in all position location systems, all through travel. Okay. So this is line signal, downshift lines of anomaly, right? This is upshift lines of anomaly. Okay, 2 track set location lines. 0 gravity, 1 service, setting line communication of 0, 1 traction, 0, 0, 0. Triangulations over 3 over measure or scale. Very high line of formula. Now we go through flux and E centers as screens and set position location in 3 centers in travel communications. Consoles lines, direct lines, and course centers, line communication system all through travel. Sets calculation lines, 3 lines of perimeters and parameters, and line course centers, and 3 lines of communication lines of 6 over screen. This is all logs of console, and line communications of navigator to navigation. Right? This is the high information is the high communication of its quantum. So what you're seeing up is what you're seeing below. That's the question. Powerful stuff, isn't it? Now you have to understand what an L is. What is an L this way? Okay? You see in that line signals, right? So what do you see in position? There's another L. Okay, so you got an L lines of 7. Okay, and then you have a high position location to a system. Okay? There's so many ways of looking at this, guys. When you change the frame of communication. When you change the frame of communications all at once, right? So you're signaling your grounds in position case circulation and rotation lines of 45 communication of angle. Process in that communication system all through tractions. Solar sail. Inline rotations, outline centers, the D factors, another solar sail, and direct sail. Okay? Solar sail to direct sail. Okay? Opposite direct signals, opposite tracks, communication lines, a high position of yin and yang. Okay? So I wanted you guys to understand what the real question is now, is the answer of everything that you're already identifications of. Okay? That puts every location system through yin and yang. Okay? So it's very powerful, isn't it? But you guys got to see it on a 4-line flat line, a screen adaptation of system. Everybody knows what a flat line is, right? That's a flat line. But the flat line is a 2-line signals and a 3 lines of communications. Directing ground centers, 3 signals, lines of ground, communication lines of flat surface. Process lines of indication system over tractions, over directions, to location system off the travel. Sets calculates modify 1 signal, 1 off ground communication setting of surface travel. Calculate modify center operation, 3 lines of signals and ground lines of surface and travel. Sets calculates the lines, change communication system, all through tractions. Okay? Calculates and grounds, high signals, high ground center location of intelligence, base recognition, right? Now we process the indication system all through solar track centers and 3 triangulation lines of flux. Sets calculates and grounds, the operation line signal location system all through travel. Okay? And then you come into your doors of records of time center. See the doors opening in and out, line rotation lines of 3 spectral lines of lights, and line screen adaptation of flux over screen adaptation lines of surface, right? So that volume's all lines of question and set position location settings. Question above sets lines of question below and set tractions, right? So that's where you have to indicate the position of the point dot and set lines in location system, okay? That's how it modifies the line screen adaptation of 0 line rotations, track lines and position location of 6 lines, 9 lines of sequence, process lines of 1, process lines of 2, of yin and yang, of process lines of 4. Balance off communication setting on the hands to surface. And communication lines of grounds and track communication, holographic gridding. All right? So I just want you guys to truly understand to see 4 aspects of everything that you see through letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols. And then you get a true understanding because all you're focusing on is this. You should be focusing on the other because that's the missing piece. It's like the quarter, heads and tails. Where's the body? Okay? But I'm just showing you exactly what that is in travel. So when you put that together, you have infinity 8. All right? So when you get in that position location and cycle, high travels its point lines of graph communication system off the settings. In that communication system, in that tractions, puts all of the set locations into its infinity 8 in rotation. All right? So 2 8 lines, bring in sequence lines of panel, 8 lines of sync location system to a flywheel and traction. Okay? So it indicates lines of 8 lines of settings, process lines in all communication setting, a circulation rotation. Okay? So now you know what you're dealing with, right? So it's 2 signals, lines of grounds, and line communication system off the travel. But the modification ground centers has a computer operation line signal. 2 centers, operation lines of 1 arrow, sets lines of 2 arrows, and 3 lines of flux and screen. All right? So you guys have to start to understand how to use a 4 signal in 4 different directions. 1, 2, there's 2 directions, right? 3 and 4, there's 4 directions, right? Setting lines of 5, 6, 7, and 8, and 9 in set traction, all through the number 4. What do you have in position, location, system? All through setting. Okay, very complicated stuff, but it's all structure, location, setting that's connected, right? Pyramid screen adaptations of 3 centers of graphs. The operation line signal, location, setting, cross line angles in 3 lines of communications. Okay, setting position of X-T1000 line, 1 signal lines of ground, center correlation, sending and docking at 3 travels and communications. Okay, your pyramid, right? Very powerful what you can do when you just come into your mind, not thinking at all. Thinking at all is not thinking of anything. And what is thinking? Thinking doesn't correlate anything into. You basically understand the equal sign. What is the equal sign? What's above is what's below, right? Same thing with a question. But what's above is the answer. What's below is the answer. What's the center operation is the question of communication. Question equals lines of 0. Set lines of 0 equals lines of communication. All right? So if you get a true understanding how this all works in revision, then you truly understand what yin and yang is. So the question itself is the answer that you already have. Right? So the continuous flow is truly understand how to coordinate what you are and already in position of its identifications. This opens all lines of view and communications, right? So knowing exactly how to basically, you're reaching those frequencies right now with the calculation in the alphabetical setting, the position, location, attractions, your scramblers, your direct lines, your binary codes. Your binary codes are higher lines of sequence now and set lines of travel. Process of 1 indicator, 45 lines of flux over line. That times its measure and scale. See? Change communication system all through face recognition. See the face? Sets position, location, and system. Now it's coming to attraction, right? Bringing the eye centers, lines of screen adaptations. There's the intelligence, right? And then you got the eyes in sequence. Eyes in panel, eyes in operation setting. Okay? So it's amazing how you got them in flux line and direct signal lines and ground lines of surface of attractions. It opens all communication system all through setting. Okay? Process indicators over lines of signal communication system all through travel. Has a direct line link of a panel and process communication system. Calculate and modify in center operation line sequence to inline center location of setting of travel. High core centers operate the line screen adaptations of flux over line. Okay? So everything you do through the mind is nothing but schematics of time, real time. So when you're thinking, there's no thinking when you're thinking. You're just analyzing what you're thinking. So if you're not analyzing anything, there's nothing to think about. So there's nothing to question about. Question up, question down. Now you know what it is. When you put the question here and the question upside down, you coordinate through a yin and yang. It processes the 6 and 9. Processing the 6 and 9 processes communication system all through travel. So let's get a triangulation lines of 1. We get a question here, and we get a question here. And it's at position locations. So for you guys to understand that, it's knowing how to identify that setting sequence, right? Know exactly how to come into the point graphs of communication system of travel, right? DOCSIS system lines of setting, X-T1000 comes in platforms of travel communications. Sets calculation lines, high signal lines of up, and high signal lines of down, and shift lines of anomaly. So the X-T1000 DOCSIS system on the other side line communications because it's in that direct set creates a flux over screen, right? So they don't basically get confused with what they're doing through their entry and their entry points and coming into the exit points, comes into the arrivals of departures, know exactly what they're doing through flux. A 3 triangulation system all through travel. Okay? So now you understand what the question is. It's the yin and yang. What's above, what's below. But what's above is always what's below. And what's below is always above, right? So that's how you change it. There it is, right? And there it is, right? And there it is, right? So you got north, we got north, we got north, we got north. So we got north in space and time. We got north above, high signals, and we got north below and low signals, right? Change it again. What do we have in set track communications? What do we have in track locations to its settings, right? So if we understand a line screen adaptation, what does that mean in processing, right? Z lines at equal lines in position of 3 line, all right? So you got to go beyond the eye line and know exactly what you're connecting to through its flux over screen adaptation. Process calculation in ground centers lines of two networks of screen adaptations of flux over setting. Sets calculation in ground centers of service over cross location of screen line communications. Directing ground centers, Z-force in three centers into line centers, equal lines in setting, and three traffic communication setting high surface. Then you change the ground centers into its operation system all through travel. Okay? The pi generation lines of 45 one angle. There's the angle lines, of course, centers lines of travel. So it's calculation screen lines adaptation system. So constant get in position to rotate in the cycle. Circulation rotations. Communication lines of high centers into the compass, into the rainbow, into the graph, into the location grid. The process of communication setting high lines as travels into course centers into its cloud. Now the cloud comes inside lines, inside rotation system to its cerebro. Cerebral correlates the settings and set position of core centers, calculates endorphins into high travels into firing and wiring, direct signal location system of the calculations. Sending travels in point lines graphs, enter lines its communication system all through travel. Directing grounds lines of service, high signal location system all through settings. In that communication system, travels its points graphs in communication setting all through travel. So it's very powerful when you see the brain convergent line connections. So you guys have to truly understand the modification ground centers. This is your test. This is your test. Okay, understand the brain itself. All right, so lines of communication setting is high centers. The process of position location low grounds is your 7 waving signals, which is your pyramid and 45 line communication system all through travel. Okay? So if you get a really central line communication, how it's all set up. All right? So once we understand the position, location, travel, then we change the opposite set location system of the calculations. Okay? Knowing exactly what's going on in the setting. Okay? All different angles of 4 lines of communications of set position. Okay? And once we get into that position locations, we come into distractions. What does this formulate in settings? Comes in all communication setting in process. The tree of life. Okay? And then we get into the roots. Roots come in signals, lines, ground, center, location, setting. The roots are set up now in space line. Out of sequence out of 3 lines of grounds in set position location measure. Taken out of all line course centers and 144 frequency center lines of grounds communication system that allocates time centers in reality of all communication setting of no resistance, just living the existing of all lines in real-time measure and scale of communications. Okay? And then we ground the centers, a space line communication setting. All right? There's your Skynet. Okay? There's your pi, there's your Skynet. But position lines of 2 panels operate the signal location system through the eye track correlation. There's your eye, looking this way and travel. So the eye central setting has a line center location system that opens all communication system all through travel. Okay, looking this way in directions. Okay, looking this way in directions. So it's amazing how you turn the brain line course centers to the eye line sequence, line communication setting at 360 lines of direction. Looking this way in center in 3 set communications. Looking this way in centers, downshift lines and not only upline seam communications, all through the eye set line connections, all through spectrum, all through lights. So your provision lines, you have to understand how to get into 4 face recognition settings of time. Seconds over minutes, minutes on hours, hours on frame, minutes on seconds, and seconds on hours in set directions, right? Yet in that position location, how you codify these things, the binary relines its correlates in setting a travel. Pyramid activation lines, ground centers or cross location screen adaptations, 3 lines of measure and scale, all right? 3 communication lines of ground, 0 lines, lines in position alpha, sets lines of delta, and position of theta. Correlates and settings of travels, sets communication system all through travel. Sets calculation screen adaptation system all through Saturn. There's Saturn. Look really close to face recognitions above the system, right? Calculation 1, calculation 2, 3, and 4 is set directions. Okay? So the more you get into the mind line, the more the process of communication system gets much more easier, but more complicated to the Earth now because you're losing the formation of its Earth itself that has no grounding. The grounding is the space itself. So the platforms are R-line settings, outline, inline, in communication setting, incognito, directing ground centers, lines of service, right? So the actual Earth itself in all position location is just nothing but an invisible line. All right, so what we're doing is we're leaving the three-dimensional line ground and coming invisible chart waves in set position, where it's not there, but there when needed, travel. So you're going to lose your cognitive sense, you're going to lose your sensory perception, you're going to lose all calculated lines, your three-dimensional lines of everything. Processing communication setting. That communication system to the eye central setting to those floaters. Directing ground centers, we get communication high centers, lines of travels, and direct lines of link. Process indication overlapping in sequence. That communicates high centers into red lines of sequence and security lines. High alert in travel communications. All right. Now, in that centers, silent lines and high screen depth teaching system off the travel, right? Setting communication lines of ground lines of settings. That communicates in system all through flux over lines of earth lines setting location to the system, right? So the higher we go, the more we go into the platforms and set lines of nothing. Nothing platform to all platform. How we exist in all platform is higher lines of channel. That communicates with system all through tractions. It's all signals into your platforms and set position of settings at 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 lines of measure and scale. All right. Once you get into that, you go inside and outside in travel communication into transits over divots. Set position 1, 2, 3, and 4 lines of signal locations. Right. So the Earth itself, okay, is in cloak and dagger. It's there when needed, right? But it's not processed at 3-dimension anymore. Okay. 3-dimension is lines is equals 0, line position of 0, line correlates setting, nothing lines of 3D, doesn't exist informations until you bring them back into equation. Okay? So that's what you guys come into now, because you have to truly understand you're just reaching a higher line sequence. When you get activated in the screen, the direct location is to lose yourself, to find yourself, to become yourself, you are yourself, I am myself. So I am myself in all lines at 12 line. Not a 24, not a 40, not a 72, and definitely not a 144 crystal grid. That allocates time frames in reality time, the shifts lines anomaly, the collapse of timelines, the screen adaptation setting, understand the particle accelerations of space is to cut all tethers off in 3-dimensional setting. That communicates your system all through settings, and when you communicate through settings in your flight navigation system from 0 to 12, set lines of escape, time measure equals lines of time centers into quantum time scale position lines of program. All right. Sets calculation ground centers of servers location system. All right. Tesseract. Okay. Okay. Setting lines of communication system all through tractions. Tesseract. All right. So T lines of screens equals lines of equation to 2 platforms. C correlates the system into V flux over line into setting. Okay. Unification is setting of grounds and high lines of sequence. All lines is communication system and a 45 split lines of anomaly. Sets a pyramid activation location system off the travel. Direction of time centers and location system off the calculations. All right. All through setting, all through operation. Okay. So the more you come into the fundamentals of your system, the more you become in your mobilities of your system, you lose earth of everything attractions. So you ground yourself out of the earth and you come in position of ground yourself in space of earth. So the space of the earth leads the attractions of 3-dimensional system into one body frame, into one paradigm. Okay? Embedded in your system is line screen adaptation to its entry points. That's where points, lines is question and settings in travel communications, off the direction. Okay? That's what you guys have to understand through communication. How this all works in setting, through the question. What brings it in line communication system, all through settings of 6 and 9. How rotates the system and all through travel, has a continuous force, all through identification that's already set up in screen adaptation to its settings. Okay? In that communication setting, you're leaving your 12 DNA, sets calculation lines, you have 24 lines of scale, 48 line provision, 72 computer lines into 144 equals crystal grid. At equal lines of question, sets communication lines of question on ground centers. High signal lines of 1, high signal lines of downshift lines of 2. So you guys have to really start processing the question above and below now. That's what you guys are coming into in higher line provision. Okay? So the more you do that, the more it gets in flux. So you get into surrender, and you surrender to the current, right? And when you're surrendered to the current, you're now controlling everything in set position, inside and outside at the same time. That's the question above, that's the question below. That's all it is. And you put it together. I showed you what it is, as the yin and yang has a continuous force. So not only you're surrendering, but you're submitting to yourself. And you're starting to identify yourself at a higher level. So all that low spectrum, you lose. Okay? But all that high spectrum, you gain. So what you get in position of, you start to identify more levels of you out of the low frequency into the high frequency where you're always supposed to be. Where you're always supposed to be is all levels of nothing that masses everything of its question, that marks its territory in set lines of communications, and how you see things equal and how you see things grounding in set attractions, right? Equal line centers is equal this way in travel communications, right? Equal line centers is equal this way in set travel communications, right? Platforms is setting, platforms is set position, okay? Platforms is setting, platforms is set position. There you go in travel communications, your pyramid, okay? Set sequence, grounds, film strips over direct segregation system, okay? Remember, everything is inside the pyramid itself, guys, okay? So that's what it is. That's why you have pyramids above, but you also have pyramids below. So what's that in position of its question itself? So you get a question here. So that's communication lines of the pyramid this way in that communication system, right? And then you online centers in line sequence locations this way, comes in this position location system, all right? That calculates and modify this way in travel, in set attractions. There you go. That's what it is. What's above, what's below? The questions, right? Now, it's really interesting when you look at it, right? And the center pod is the position here that puts the position here, right? That puts it in position all levels of what? Dotting screen into position of its figure 8 in center operation. Now, when you get into center operation, you come into the flux. The flux is screen adaptations with a circulation and rotation and setting of travel. Process communicates the setting to its clocking system of 24, 48, 72, 144 lines of flux. And there you go. Now you understand what question is above. Now you understand what question is below. You put that together, you're in the position of your Merkaba, tesseract, and tetrahedron. Okay? Oh yeah. Very powerful stuff, and that lines, and it comes into its yin and yang and set lines of travel. Okay? Now the outline screen is light, shades, and shadows. The team's coming in that sequence lines the communication system off their setting. Let's color the pattern. Now there's a reason why it's black and white. Black and white is not black and white. Okay? You got to get that out of the equation. A yin and yang is all different variation of colors. You've probably already seen that already, right? At a dojo, or, you know, what it's a symbol, right? It's a symbol of everything in that position locations, right? Superman, right? And set attractions. What does S stand for? What did he modify through? Hope. S equals hope, right? Equals question above and below, because he travels above and he travels below, and he travels center all lines of all communications. Travel around the Earth is not the central settings in one flat surface. Traveling around the Earth is the circular relations setting rotation. But the highest information setting is the question, which is the answer that's already inside your system of travel. So that's communication system, all the calculations. All directions, all calculate, modify, and travel communications. There you go. Boom. Yin and yang. Now you're just seeing the lines communication setting high lines of surface now. Okay? And what's in this in operation? Your pyramid. Okay? All right, clocking your centers. Pointy graph, your question lines gets a lot more communications of balance now. That puts all position how you see the triangulation this way. And now you understand how you see the triangulation this way. Questions this way and questions this way in set position. All through calculation. Okay? That's how it comes together through this and in setting. Okay? Processes, communication, setting, all through your flux and travel. Okay? Then you get 2 panels operation lines of high travel. Okay? Then you get in the position location of 45 angle of travel. Then you get indication lines of height, so cases of panels over travel. Right? Calculates and modify into the platform of the center operation, the transits of divots. Setting process lines of the eye respector look in this way and travel, and direct signals of 3 lines of measure and scale. Setting communication lines of this way of travel and set position location of scale. Process in that communication system, all through tractions. There's your eye and center operation. So now you understand what's above and what's below, right? Which is the equal platform, is the equilibrium, how you see the communication setting of the transits over divots. The process of communication setting. All through set position, all through tractions. There's the eyelashes. Now the eyelashes are transitions over centers. They're feelers. They're electronic feelers. Every time you blink, you're blinking through the sun and the moon in seconds, minutes, and hours in travel. Every time you blink. Imagine this. So every time you're blinking, did you know that you're bringing up the sun every single time? Check this out. Every time you blink, it's not a coincidence. What's happening with your eye line, your spectrum, the position, location, or time zone is coming out track qualities and setting. So you automatically come into the sunset and the sunrise. That's already done through its equation. So remember, the eyes are already set up, which means you're already knowing what it is through identification system. The circulation grounds as a high line setting location system all through spectrum, the eye division, okay? Sets the flux over line screen adaptations of flux. High centers lines of sequence sets all communication setting your planetary settings and 12 lines of all communication setting. 12 planets come in into the eye line center location setting. 12 lines of position of your floaters comes in all position of XT1000s. That sets a part of acceleration system all through the eye lines. High lines of screen adaptation system all through tractions. Ooh-ah. Seconds, minutes, and hours every time you blink. Now you understand that, don't you? Right? See, it's important to understand your whole body, what it really is. Okay? Like Tristan said, it's all Trinity. It's all synchronized. It's all together. It works with the triality. It works with trial and error. We have to start identifying how to see that in line communications and stop seeing ourselves in direct signal location system, all through position, location, setting, and travel communications of line conditions of error of 404. Okay, that modifies, put everything back in set lines of sequence in all communication system all through travel. So I'm showing you exactly how you use the question above and how you use the question below. Okay, very powerful stuff, guys. That's how it's all set up. And that's the equilibrium above and below now. Okay, so you just have to send the box and frame and the position of the flux over screen. Okay, directing lines of all communication setting to a dimensional door, travel point lines of graph, travel line points dislocation to a system, or line course centers, getting direct signal location setting that operates the system in all through calculations. Look at this in travel. Set communication system all through seating and arrangement. Sitting down. All right, you're sitting here. And I already showed you guys this in setting, but it's very powerful. What you can do when you're saying question up and question down. Puts all communication setting into your computer operation system and how to use it and how to see the holographic ground centers and locations of the system and travel. 3 sitting down. All right? Okay? That's how you come into your system and travel. Okay? That's how you come in your system and travel at a higher frequency. You start to understand what's going on with your system and settings of 4 lines of flux. But it's very powerful when you come into the seating and arrangement location system, setting track centers, setting operation lines of its dimensional doors in set position. Look at that through equations. Right? And then you come into this. There's the perimeters. There's the set lines of communication system off the traction. Look at that. Okay? Now it's getting dimensional. Right? It's getting volume. Now it's getting mass in travel communications. All right? Very complicated stuff if you don't understand what you're doing in set position of time and scale of all communication. Right? Setting platforms over here, platforms over here, platforms over here. Look at that through equation. Right? So it's just all lines on how you see things into interdimensionals of space and time. Right? It's very powerful when you just connect the dots in all communication to its setting. All right? So that's basically what it is. And the more you process, the more it gets easier, the more you understand what you're doing is you're reaching those higher levels. How you see yourself a question above and how you see yourself a question below is process how to use it in all calculation setting to its system, how to come together through yin and yang. Now you understand what question is here, and now you understand what question here is in trouble. Okay? Booyah. It's a lot more fun when you get a true understanding when you go to higher lines of frequencies, right? How to ground that in set position location in your systems, all through set track communications. Okay? That's it. 6 and 9. So that's a point graph. That's where it is. That's where the equation comes in. That's where the dots come in, right? So if you get in this position, you have to, I'll show you again, right? All right, so we got the position location system, right? How it comes in this and how it comes into that, right? Into this and travel. Right? So, knowing exactly how you see the 6 and 9 and the 9 and 6 in set position location of the system, there it is. Check mark and balances out communication setting and travel. Okay? So there you go. You guys have any questions or comments? Now's the time in travel communication system. See you guys in 5.